Good evening, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Sports Talk with Rags here in season 4, episode 65. And tonight, here we have the honor to have with us Jason Romano, who's part of Sports Spectrum. And Jason, how you doing today?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Good.
Appreciate your time for coming on and talking about your interest in sports and what you currently do. So
Yeah,
look forward here to this time.
me too. This will be fun. I'm grateful that you asked and appreciate the invite as always. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
gotta start calling you Rags, I guess,
Well,
right? Not
yeah.
Mark. Is that what everybody
Well,
calls you?
hey, let's see. Rags is my stage name, so whatever whatever works. But hey, let's start at the beginning. I mean, growing up, was it always about covering sports with your interest, or were you also playing sports?
It was always about playing sports when I was a kid, like a little kid.
Okay.
When I got to, I don't know, probably, I mean, I guess when I'm 12, 13, 14, I'm playing sports,
Yeah.
but I'm watching sports. I'm collecting cards, baseball cards. I'm fighting my brother for the sports newspaper to read the box scores every morning. I had sticker books back in the 80s. They had not just trading cards, but they had trading stickers. Uh,
Yeah.
so I collected the sticker books. I had notebooks of stats, so I could kind of say I was setting myself up to work in sports media, but I still wanted to play as long as I could. And I played baseball through my sophomore year of high school. I played basketball all throughout high school, and I played a semester of community college basketball. So I can tell you I played college basketball, although that means nothing. Um, I played in a lot of church leagues and rec leagues in basketball as I got older into my 30s and 40s. But that was pretty much it. In high school, I kind of knew where my limit was. And so I pursued sports broadcasting as I headed towards college.
Yeah, and then while you got into college, I mean, did you work there in the sports department or different athletics there on campus to start building your resume and getting your experience?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, well, definitely. Yes. I went to a community college for my first 2 years outside of Syracuse, Cayuga Community College. And, they had the best 2 year broadcasting program in the state of New York. And that's why I went there because it was affordable,
Right.
because they had a great media program. And it was day 3 of being on campus. I was still 17. I wasn't even 18 years old yet. And I was on the radio
Right.
hosting a radio show as the Emperor. That was my DJ nickname in college.
Okay.
One of them, anyways. I had a couple, but the Emperor's Throne was the name of the show that I did. I'm a big Star Wars geek, and so
Yeah.
that kind of fit perfectly for me. And I was DJing at 17 years old on a college radio station, playing 80s and 90s, early 90s hard rock ballads, by bands like Def Leppard and
Yeah.
Skid Row and bands like that. That's what I was playing on the radio station. It was Auburn's rock leader in Auburn, New York. Auburn's rock
Right.
leader, Win 89 FM. This is 33 years ago, so a long time ago. Uh,
Right.
but I loved it, and it really was the bug, if you will, that I got about wanting to pursue the dream of working in broadcasting. Now, what was also cool at Cayuga was they let me broadcast all of the sporting events. So my second year, my sophomore year there, I was the sports director, and
Mhm.
I got to call high school football. I got to call all of the Cayuga Community College basketball games for the men,
Right.
which is how I got to know those guys and play a little bit, which ultimately led me to being on the team. But
Yeah.
I do so much at such a young age. I was not very good, but I was very eager and willing and excited that I could be a part of something like this. And if I could have told you how the path would have turned out, when I was 18, I would have probably laughed at you. But it was definitely what I wanted to do, is work somehow, some way in this media business. And if it could have been sports, it was a bonus.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny that you bring up, upstate New York and there at one of the Finger Lakes,
Yes.
Auburn as my wife Elizabeth, she has family in that area. But when I was growing up, I was talking to my uncle, and and he was a longtime sports fan, and so he said, "Hey, Mark," he said, "if you have an interest in being a broadcaster, Syracuse, a
Mm.
lot of the
Oh, I know. Yeah.
broadcasters, are Syracuse grad," and so that's how I got to. I know they're part of the ACC now, but that's how I started following Syracuse here, as I was,
Yeah.
junior high and then the high school, just following
I
them
wanted to
with
go to
the
Syracuse,
dream.
Mark. I wanted to go to Syracuse
Right,
badly. 2 things. Number 1, really expensive. I
right,
came from a broken home with parents that divorced. My mom worked 3 jobs. We didn't have any money. And
mm,
the idea of taking out $100,000 in loans even back then,
right.
just scared the heck out of me. So I said, "I can't go to Syracuse." But the other thing was it was just so big, and I think hindsight, if I could have done it over, or if it was maybe my situation, like if it was my daughter, I probably would have gone to Syracuse if they would have accepted me, but I just couldn't do it. And then when I got done with my community college, I still couldn't go to Syracuse because of the cost. So I found another, 4-year state
Well,
school. And
yeah.
that's how I ended up at State University of New York at New Paltz, which is
Right.
downstate towards New York City. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And the thing is, like, with this business, and I know as we talk here during this episode, we're gonna talk about, how your journey and the technology, has expanded. But, with you talking about getting a start there, 17, 18, there at the community college, and
Yeah.
taking the reins and running with it. I mean, it's pretty much anywhere, anywhere that you can start building your resume to get experience and being at the right place at the right time in this business.
Totally, and I think I didn't know that real well when I was in college, especially the first 2 years. I thought you get a degree, you
Right.
apply for jobs, and you get your job. Like, that's kinda what I thought, and I was 19 when I graduated with my associate's degree, and I didn't get any radio jobs. In fact, I think I did, like, 1 kind of volunteer board operating job in Auburn while I was in college, that I board opped and ran the board for, I think it was Hobart Lacrosse. Hobart was a college out there. They're very big on their lacrosse program.
Right.
And I ran the board and, filled commercials and played carts for a couple Hobart lacrosse games. That was it. And so when I got out of college at 19, I wish I had some kind of mentors. I mean, I wish LinkedIn or, social media existed in 1993. It did not.
No,
So,
no.
I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't ready to kind of continue to go to college. I just thought, "Okay, I'm 19 and I have a degree. Let's go."
Right.
And it didn't happen. So I worked at Toys R Us for 3 months after I graduated with my associates, and then I got a job at a hospital because my mom was a nurse at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, where I grew up. So I got a job there as a telephone operator at 19, making $6 an hour, full time with benefits. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm loaded here." But that's not quite how it worked out, because it was about 2 years later in 1995 when I should have been graduating that summer of 95. I realized I got to go back to school here because I don't want to work in a hospital for the rest of my life. And my roommate, Eddie Nieves, who's, one of my best friends and my best man in my wedding, him and I both kind of took the same path. We graduated in 1993. We took 2 years off. We worked. He was working at a bank. I was working at a hospital. And we both realized we don't want to do this for the rest of our lives. So at 21 years old, we both made the decision to go back to college and get our 4-year degree. So we went
Yeah.
back 2 years at different places. I went to New Paltz, like I mentioned, and that's where I'm a little bit older, a little bit wiser, I think.
Mhm.
And I was all encompassing on doing as much broadcasting work as I could those last 2 years. And so I was a sports director of the radio station. I did a bunch of games. I had my own sports talk show. It was terrible, by the way, but I was in it and I was, ready to roll. And so when I graduated in 1997 with my 4-year degree, that's when I said, "All right, it's time to really
Sure.
pursue this
Yeah.
degree." Now, here's the thing. I still didn't do any internships, which is just
Right.
dumb. I didn't have any direction or guidance of people to say, you need to go do I mean, I was right near New York City. I was an hour
Yeah.
from the city and I still didn't go down there. And
Mm.
so what it took was graduating in 97, in May of 97, and in June of 97. So about a month later, I just took my resume and walked it into the offices, or I was going to walk it into the offices of every radio station in Albany, New York, because I was
Wow.
going to stay home.
Right.
And I walked it into News Talk Radio 810 WGY, 50,000-watt news talk giant, the oldest radio station in New York State. And I
Oh.
handed my resume to the lady at the front desk, Carol, who I'll never forget her name now. And I said, "Hey, I don't know you from Adam, but I'm Jason. Here's my resume. I'll do anything and you don't have to pay me. But if you have any openings or opportunities, I would love to be a part of your station." I was going to do that with every radio station, but I didn't have to go to any more because that lady, Carol, for some reason, took an interest in me. And the next day, I got a call to come in to interview for a post grad internship, which I
Okay.
spent 3 months working for free at WGY, just kind of learning how the real business works. And that led me to my first job in the fall, September of 1997,
Oh wow.
working at WGY, making 15,000. That's 1 5
Yeah.
a year, salaried. It wasn't hourly, $15,000 full time to be the afternoon radio talk show producer at WGY. And they could have paid me $5,000. I wouldn't have cared. I was just so
Right.
happy to be getting a job and getting paid in this business. And while I was doing that, I was working 2 other jobs. I was still working that summer in the hospital part time. I was
Yeah.
still working at this marketing company. Anything I could do to live on my own, to make some money, and then to get into this business. And ultimately, it worked out, praise God. And I was just so happy because by the summer of 97, or I should say the fall of 97, I had just met my wife, my now wife.
Mm-hmm.
We were dating, and she's kind of like, "What's this guy doing? He's working 3 jobs, and one of them's not even, he's pursuing this broadcasting thing." But it worked out. I got that job at WGY and spent 3 years there and really learned a lot about local radio. And that's ultimately after that was what led me to ESPN.
Oh, okay. So what going to Bristol, I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in a military family. So there in the from 79 to 84, living on a Coast Guard base across the water from Manhattan. I mean,
Yeah.
living near New York City, you had plenty of channels. But then, moving to Florida and having cable. I mean, my brother and I there, starting there in January of '85. I mean,
Mhm.
we started our ODing of ESPN, and wow,
Pretty much the
that
same way.
that would be, the sports dream here of getting the opportunity of going to Bristol, Connecticut.
Totally. Yeah, it was. I mean, as a kid, ESPN was everything, right? Like,
Right.
especially, I was born in 73.
Okay.
ESPN came around in 79. I
Right.
think my house, when we first got cable, it was probably the mid 80s, like 83, 82. So I'm like
Yeah.
8, 9 years old. And sports is everything to me. Now, ESPN didn't have the big sports
Not yet.
iconic games yet until
Yeah.
87 when they got the NFL package. So before
Right.
that, I know I had ESPN and I watched it, but there wasn't a lot of games on their channel that I was
Mhm.
interested in. They had a little bit of NBA, definitely college
Right.
basketball was big, college football. But it was in 87 when ESPN got the NFL, and they'll tell you all the people that were around during that time. And
Right.
that was the pivotal moment that put ESPN on the map as a legitimate sports media company. And that's
Right.
also around the time as I'm turning into a teenager here.
Right.
I'm all in on sports. And so ESPN, especially as I got into the early 90s and I was graduating high school and into college, oh my gosh, that was everything. I watched Sports Center like it was
Yeah.
out of style. I mean, I watch the reruns of Sports Center in the morning hour. It's the same thing. And people were like, "Why are you watching that again?" It's like, because it's sports. It's
And
highlights of
it's
sport.
Sports Center,
And there was
Chris
no
Berman and
exactly. It's
Tom
Sports Center.
Means.
Yes. And I mean, I remember watching Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick in college and thinking,
Oh, yeah.
the big show. This is
Right.
amazing. Like, I want to
Right.
be like those guys. And, in the 90s, after I went through everything I just shared, getting
Yeah.
a job graduating college, getting a job, I still didn't think ESPN was an attainable position. I mean, that's a big deal to
Right.
get there. And it was really on a whim, Mark. I found a job opening on a website called allaccess.com, which still exists. It's basically
Oh,
a trade website for radio at the time. Now I think it's audio and media, but at the time it was just radio. And I would go on there and kind of see, they had a lot of top 40 and different things like that, but they had a job listing area.
mm,
While I was at WGY, I just applied on a whim. I'm like, oh, look, ESPN radio producer. I'll apply for
mm,
that job. They wanted 5 years of network radio experience, and I had 2 years of local radio experience. I was not qualified. But
mm,
somehow, some way, they said, come out to Bristol, Connecticut. I drove out. It was about 2 hours. Drove out here to Connecticut and got an interview for a job. And, the story is a really long one. I'll just keep it short and say it was two people that they wanted to hire. I was one of them. They had one job opening. So they had to figure out which one to keep out of the two. Ultimately, I wasn't really a big believer in God or divine intervention at that time, but I believe God worked that out because ESPN made a point to actually add an extra position and hired me and the other guy. The other
oh,
guy is a guy named Paul.
win-win. Yeah.
It was win-win. And the other guy was a guy named Paul Pabst, who started the same day as me. Paul is now Dan Patrick's producer and has been for 15 years.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Paulie, if you know Dan Patrick's show.
Yeah.
Paulie, that's Paul Pabst, who I started on the same
Oh,
day with at
oh,
ESPN back in July of 2000, so 24
okay.
years ago. And so that's how I got the job. And I really kind of don't know how I got it because I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a connection in there. I didn't go to a big time school,
Right.
ACC, SEC, Big East. I didn't go to a big school. So I didn't really have a lot of the connections that a lot of people within ESPN had to get a job. I attribute it now as kind of great timing. I don't know if I believe in luck anymore, but I definitely believe in intervention, divine intervention. And I made my own breaks too. Like I still had to apply for that job. My grandfather used to tell me all the time, Jason, you make your own breaks.
Right.
And I'll never forget what my pa used to tell me, and he's right. Like I still had to apply for the job, go out there,
Right.
do my thing, I guess, in interviewing to be at least attractive enough to be a candidate. And then I got the job. And then I felt like the pressure was more on after I got the job than getting the job. And getting the job is hard. But once you're there, you kind of feel like you're working for the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys. Like you can't screw this up. This is a big
Right.
time company. And I didn't know if I was qualified to do a good enough job. I mean, I really fought that. Like, am I qualified here? Am I good enough to be a producer? And I would look for those moments when I accomplished something, and I'm like, all right, I think I, it's kind of like you're a baseball player. I think I got a hit. I think I deserve to be up in the big leagues here. That's kind of how I felt, but it was so cool just to get that job and to say that I could work at ESPN, and I was there for a long time.
Yeah, and so then, with your experience there on ESPN, I mean, did then doors open here? I know that we
Yeah,
connected here with your show there, Sports
full spectrum.
Spectrum, but
Yeah.
what was after the experience there at ESPN, and was it ESPN radio that you pretty much worked at?
It's where I started. So
Okay.
my first 4 years, 3 to 4 years was on ESPN radio.
Okay.
I worked on Mike and Mike in the morning
Yeah.
when they had just started.
Right.
In July of 2000, I got there and I was on Mike and Mike on day
Okay.
3.
Yeah.
Worked there for a year, so I got to really get my feet wet with Greeny and Golick in that
Mm.
show. And then I went and produced a show called Game Night on ESPN Radio for 2
Yeah.
years, and did that with a guy named Chuck Wilson and Chris Moore, and had
Right.
so much fun. I also worked with Doug Gottlieb, who came in right at the tail end of my time, and I was his first radio producer at
Okay.
ESPN. Doug Gottlieb's, and Doug's obviously had a great media career, and now he's into coaching.
Coaching.
So
Right.
it's really fascinating to think because radio was my baby, if you will,
Right.
where I got my start. But I started to realize at ESPN, like there's so many other areas. And so I went into television, and in 2004, I got this job, which was a talent producer job. That's what the title was, talent
Yeah.
producer. on the TV side. And, it was a brand new title, brand new job. They didn't have talent bookers or talent producers at ESPN until 2003. I
Okay.
was the third ever talent booker, I think, that they hired.
Mm,
And I came from the radio side because it was very natural because you book a lot of guests on radio,
right.
then come to television and be able to book guests. But what that did was that got me in the TV side. And
Okay.
listen, ESPN radio is phenomenal, but ESPN was built on their television network.
Right.
And
Right.
so there was a lot more resources, a lot more people paying attention, a lot more eyeballs, and a lot more opportunities on the television side than there were on radio. And that's where I cut my teeth and really, understood ESPN was in the radio side. But when I got to the TV side, I saw a lot more people in those meetings, a lot more people caring about the programming. And, I worked with Bob Lee. I worked
Yeah.
with Skip Bayless. I worked with Stephen A. Smith. I worked with Chris
Right.
Berman and
Mm,
Tom Jackson on Countdown. Like I
mm,
got to work with some pretty big name people and some pretty big name shows. And, I did that for 9 years as a talent booker on the TV side. And
yeah.
then I finished out my career at ESPN working on the social and digital media side, which in
Uh,
2012,
yeah.
social media was starting to hit a peak, if you will. And ESPN started to pay attention a little bit more to social media. And that's when they created this social media department. And I was the, I don't know, fifth or sixth social media hire, and they asked me to start up the ESPN football social media pages. And so I
Okay.
was really focused on the NFL, and I worked on the NFL project for 8 years and helped build up their social media. The irony of the whole thing is at the very end of my career, I ended up back on Mike and Mike. So
Oh,
my
cool.
first year at
Right.
ESPN and my last year at ESPN, I worked on Mike and Mike, bookended by 15 years of other shows. But it was so great to come back and work on Mike and Mike in that last year, and just be a part of what they had built, that real big empire that they
Yeah.
had built by the time I got there in 2015, 2016. And yeah, then it was time to leave because
Right.
I just felt like it wasn't that I needed to get out of there. It just was, I
Right.
was trying to follow the call I felt like the Lord was placing on my life, and it was time to go, I don't know, try something different. And if I wasn't going to do it at that point in my mid 40s, I probably would never have done it. But I'm glad I did. And that's how I ended up at Sports Spectrum.
Yes, and tell the listeners, about Sports Spectrum.
Yeah. So Sports Spectrum is their tagline is where sports and faith connect. So
Okay.
it's the intersection of sports and faith. And faith is faith in God, Christianity,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
this magazine, this brand actually started in 1985. I was 12 years old when it started. Dr. J. Julius Irving, the famous basketball player, was one of the main cogs to start this brand. They wanted to start a faith and family and sports sort of media platform.
Right.
They had a magazine that they called Sport Focus, which changed to Sports Spectrum in 1989, 4
Okay.
years later. And they had a little television show on ESPN in
Okay.
1985, ironically. And that's how it started. And really, what it was, the whole point was to tell stories, which,
Yeah.
ESPN's been in the storytelling business forever. But it was to tell stories, but to tell the unique stories of these athletes and coaches whose faith is very important to them, who love
Right.
Jesus and just want to live that out. And so, I didn't really know or hear about Sports Spectrum until, 2013.
Mm,
When I was at ESPN, I had heard about them. One of them sent me their magazine. And I was kind of intrigued. Okay, this is interesting. My faith didn't become an important part of my life until, my late 20s.
mm,
So as I'm at ESPN and growing in my 30s and my 40s, my faith is getting stronger as well. And so in 2016, I connected with a guy named Steve Stenstrom, who was a longtime NFL quarterback and played at Stanford and quarterbacked at Stanford under Bill Walsh. Like
yeah.
he was, learning from the best. And
Right.
Steve is now in my boss, and he's the president of Sports Spectrum. And we
Okay.
connected on social media and got on the phone and talked a few times, and we just kind of aligned quite a bit on, certainly our beliefs, but our desire to kind of want to tell stories and be intentional about our faith, but do it in the sports space.
Yeah.
And, at ESPN, I love ESPN. You've heard me talk about it. I have zero bad things to say about my time there. It was awesome. But they're not working in the faith and sports department. They're just working in the sports department. And I
Right.
I wanted to figure out, like, what does that look like to work in sports and faith? And so Sports Spectrum came along. They offered me this really cool opportunity, even though it was a contract position and I didn't have, the same benefits. It was a 40% pay cut. Like, all of these things didn't make sense from a worldly perspective. But for me, it was like this opportunity, right? To
Yeah.
tell these stories. And so I said yes. I prayed a lot about it. I talked to my wife. We sought the right timing, which is ultimately God's timing in my eyes for that.
Right.
And it was the right time to go in 2017. And the coolest thing about it was they asked me to kind of jumpstart the brand. It had kind of been dying. It hadn't been keeping up with the digital world that had,
Mhm.
taken shape. And they just said, just start this thing up. Like, get the website going with stories and articles. Let's continue the magazine, and you start a podcast. And that was really the thing that kind of hooked me was, we want you, Jason, to start the Sports Spectrum podcast.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, okay.
but not only that, they said, we want you to host it. I haven't hosted anything since college.
Right.
ESPN, I was a producer, not a,
Right.
so I wasn't sure that they were being serious about it, but ultimately they were. And for the last 7 years, I've been the host of Sports Spectrum's podcast. And just recently, we actually brought a co-host onto the show, Matt Forte, the
Yeah.
longtime Chicago Bears running back.
Right.
So I was on this island by myself for 7 years, but I love what I get to do. And I loved my job at ESPN.
Right.
This job I have now is the most purposeful job because I can talk to an athlete, and Matt Forte was one of those athletes.
Yeah.
And I can ask them about sports all day, till the cows come home. I can talk about sports with them. But when you ask them about the most important thing in their life that they never get asked about, they
Right.
light up. And that's what we get to do at Sports Spectrum, is ask them about their faith, which is, for many of them, most of them, the most important thing in their life. And so we get to talk to, athletes, coaches, broadcasters. I've even talked to some pastors and team chaplains. Like, it's really a kind of unique space where we can welcome these conversations about Jesus and about sports and let the two intersect in a really, really cool way.
Yeah, and where is that? Let's see, is it YouTube channel
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all
Yeah.
the different areas where you can
Platforms. Yeah.
post, yeah, different platforms where you can post your episodes?
Yeah, so all the episodes and interviews we've done are on our YouTube channel.
Right.
You can also listen to them on Apple and Spotify and the Google applications. You can listen to it on Amazon. So the podcast is there, but there's a lot more content than just the podcast, which I get excited about. Like, our website has everything. It has our devotionals on there. It has articles every day on the different athletes that are doing great things in sports, and leading with their faith in front. It's got, video content. It's got our newsletter that's there. You can order our magazine there. So
Okay.
I always tell people to go to the website because that's the home base for everything. But our social media pages as well, like Instagram, Facebook,
Yeah.
Twitter X, even YouTube. Like, there's tons of clips and just little content pieces and graphics that you can kind of just, devour, really. And what we hope is that you can use them and share it with others. Like,
Right.
it's a non-intrusive way to introduce people to athletes who love the Lord. And listen, if you're not a believer or not a person who loves God or whatever, there's no judgment here, but this
Right.
is what we do. And
Right.
if it's a way to kind of introduce something positive and hopeful, and a way to point people to the Lord as what we think is the way, the truth, and the life, like, let's
Yes.
do it. And we're just using
Yeah.
sports as a way to do that. So I would highly recommend people check out our social media pages just to get a little taste. And then if they want to listen to the podcast or watch the podcast, they can do that on all the platforms I just mentioned.
Yes, and the website, is it sportspectrum
Dot
uh,
com. That's it.
com? Okay.
Sportspectrum.com. That's the home
Right.
base. Yes, sir.
Well, that's awesome, Jason, and here being in the Tidewater, Virginia area,
Yes.
and being around the same age. I mean, I reached out to Don Beebe, and
Hmm.
he came on, shared his faith, and then my
Yeah,
nephews have gone to Liberty, not played sports, but
that's okay.
definitely they're getting an education, and with my wife and I being season ticket holders, we've had
Nice.
Jamie Chadwell and Richie McKay, and then even Jonathan Falwell have
Hmm.
come on past podcasts.
That's great. Yeah, I love Liberty. I've been down there once. I
Okay.
have friends up here who from our church that go to that school. I know, Coach McKay pretty well. We've had Coach Chadwell on.
Okay.
We even had Coach Hugh Freeze on multiple times
Yeah.
when he was at Liberty. I love Liberty. I mean, I wish I was down sometimes in that area to go to more games and to just be around that atmosphere because Liberty is awesome. I got to speak at the big church that's across the street from Liberty at a
Thomas Road.
yes
Yeah.
at a men's conference there. I want to say it was 2022, and
Okay.
it was phenomenal. Like I loved my time, and I want to come back, and I'm hoping that at some point I can get back down there. By the
Yeah.
way, as a New York Mets fan, I'm very familiar with Lynchburg, Virginia.
Yes, that's
They
right.
had a minor league baseball team down there. The Norfolk Tides were there. It was
Right.
Tidewater for a while.
Yeah.
I think Lynchburg was a single A
Yeah.
affiliate of the Mets back in the 80s
Right.
when Doc Gooden played there. And Daryl Strawberry is a friend of mine. And I know Daryl came through
Wow.
the system. So I know that area pretty well. And as a Mets fan, I knew about Tidewater and Lynchburg and that area because I'm a Mets fan way before I even knew about Liberty. So
Yes.
pretty cool
Well,
that you're down
well,
there. Lots of
and
good things
the
happening.
thing, and the thing is, when we lived in New York, my brother followed my dad with rooting for the Yankees, while I just picked the Mets,
Hmm.
just to not root for the same team, and so
Yeah.
definitely, I've had Howard Johnson and Ed Hearn on, but
Love that. Yeah,
you,
those are
you
my
know,
guys when I was a
yeah,
kid. I mean,
right,
all of those names are like,
yeah.
I mean, you're just bringing me back to
Right.
1986,
Well, hey, I know that you got to go here in a few minutes, but I
Yeah.
definitely want to highlight, especially with Monday night game this past Monday night.
Mm.
Let's talk about that poster there that's behind you about C.J. Stroud.
Yeah, so I'll grab the magazine too. This is our magazine. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Our latest Sports Spectrum magazine. CJ Stroud on the cover.
Yeah.
I'll just disclose this here. I grew up a Dallas Cowboys fan.
Right.
Um, I'm on a break from them right now. I tell people
Right.
they're so bad and it's so broken there that I just for my own sanity as a fan
Right.
need to just not get too heavily involved. The Monday night game regarding these Houston Texans was kind of the final straw for me. I'm sure I'll watch them on Thanksgiving, but
Right.
I was kind of done just investing my time with the Cowboys because it just causes me a lot of mental pain that I don't need to deal with.
Right.
CJ, on the other
Yeah.
hand, is phenomenal. And I interviewed him back in the summer
Oh, cool.
and got to talk to him about his faith, got to talk
Yeah.
to him about the most important thing in his life. And what that led to was the cover of our magazine. There we go.
Yeah.
With him on the cover. And it really talks about his outspoken and boldness about his faith. And we got to talk to, a few people around him, some chaplains and we even got to talk to, his backup quarterback, Case Keenum, and just kind of get
Yeah.
an idea about, who this guy is and what he's all about. And yeah, CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
This magazine is a special one for us because, CJ, he didn't have to say yes. He could have
Right.
easily just said, I've never heard of Sports Spectrum.
Right.
They're not, ESPN, but he loves the Lord. And he's told me anytime he gets a chance to talk about Jesus, like he wants to do it.
Oh,
And I was fortunate that he said yes to come on our show. And
boom.
special thanks, by the way, to the Houston Texans because they had a big play in whether or not they would even bring this to his, plate and say, "Do you want to do this?"
Right.
Thankfully, they did because they could have said no thanks and moved on.
Right.
And they were willing to say yes, and ultimately we got CJ on, so it was cool.
Oh, well, nice. And Jason, I mean, great story. And I know that the episodes that I've seen, and definitely enjoy what you're doing there at Sports Spectrum and what the main goal is here with, people, athletes, coaches, whoever they are, talking about their faith
Yeah,
and thanks again for coming on, and I appreciate your time. And when I post the episode, I'll add the website here. Then the listeners can go check you guys out there at sportspectrum.com.
Sounds good. Hey, Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Sure.
Keep doing what you're doing, buddy. And if you want me back on another time, happy to do it.
All right. Well, sounds good. And thanks again for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank
All right.
you.